Hi everyone, my name's Gerry Ty. I'm from DIPG Research and I'm the father of Talon, who I lost to DIPG in 2012 at the age of 5. Today we're talking to Dr. Marcelo Ortigao and he will introduce himself shortly and we're going to be talking about indirect costing and direct costing for medical research and how it's broken down. So, Marcel, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Jerry. It's good to be here once again. This is part of our chat series, ongoing chat series for the DIPG research. And as you may know now, I'm based in Colorado, and I'm the father of Juliana, who passed away nearly 6 years ago. And she was 10 years and 8 months.
Wow, it's just gone so quickly, hasn't it?
It
Yeah.
does. But it's, yeah, every day is struggle, like for everybody else in this group. So.
Mhm.
But we
Yeah,
keep the memories alive, and we do what we can, and we keep chugging along.
absolutely. And this chat series is really quite good because, apart from us being DIPG parents, we're both in the medical community and we have quite a range of experience that we want to share with people and explain things as it develops over time. By the way, I'm in Sydney, Australia, so we're in a little bit of a time difference, but we can work with that. Okay, so today we're talking about indirect costing and direct costing for medical research and how it's broken down. What's your experience in this area?
Yes, so I think this is a very timely discussion because um, we've always put out numbers that people are very familiar with right now, particularly the issue of the investment on the IPG or the investment from NCI in pediatric cancer that has had this historic 3.9% or 4% of the entire NCI budget, and it's been in that number for many years, about 40 years hasn't really changed. And I spent 35 years as a scientist, and I've had my share of grants, federal grants, NIH, DoD, CDC, and so forth. So I'm very familiar with the process, or not only how to submit grants, but how to successfully submit or successfully submit competitive grants and get funding for the research in my lab. But basically, when the fund comes, there are two distinct pots of money. One is what we refer to direct costs. The direct cost is everything that is going to be associated with a scientist research. So, for example, if I submit a proposal to investigate something within my field, which was infectious disease, I submitted, I need to investigate this particular pathogen and what it does, and so on and so forth. I would then establish a budget on what is that I needed to answer a set of questions that I would put forth in my proposal. And am I going to pay somebody? Am I going to hire students or postdocs or technicians? And am I going to buy equipment? Am I going to, how much of that money is going to go for travel? How much of that money I need to buy reagents or consumables. So that is added up and put it in the budget, and that goes as direct costs. If my proposal is approved, then there might be some discussions later in terms of is the entire budget appropriate? Does it need to be cut, or how much, and so on and so forth. But let's assume, for example, that the budget isn't cut, and I've asked for 4 year of funding. Again, salaries and benefits for the individuals who are going to be on the salary, and for how long. This is all established there. Sometimes those things come in blocks, in modules of increments of 25,000. So if you come across NIH, oh, it's a modular budget. So that's what it means. It goes in increments of 25,000. And there's some limits to that. And then you can go to non-modular. It just depends on how much money that you need for your research, how you're asking. So these things can vary. But that is all direct cost. So that money is going to be spent by me in my lab to maintain that research over the time frame that I've asked for. Indirect cost. is what the university or research institute that I, as a scientist, am affiliated with, and how much they charge. And that may vary between different institutions. That could be, for example, it could be a private university, could be a state university, could be even a federal university. They will have their own a contract that was developed over time with the funding agencies for a specific percent of what I'm asking. So if I'm asking $1 million for 5 years, right? So that means, roughly $200,000 a year for 5 years, 1 million. If the university has indirect costs of, say, 60%, that means, for example, NIH, which is going to provide me with the money that I requested, 1 million, the NIH will also provide 600,000, 60% of the grant to the university. Therefore, the entirety of the grant now went from 1 million to 1.6 million. I don't see, generally speaking, I don't see that $600,000 at all. That goes to the university administration, and they will then use that money for a variety of things. And people have seen in the news anything going from, for rent or for electricity, for computer, for core facility, for hiring staff or secretarial staff, even a completely different secretarial staff. I have no idea where they are. They are within the university. It can be a different department, different college. Doesn't matter. If that money goes to the university administration. So that is the main difference between direct cost and indirect cost.
Yeah, so that's been, I think, a bit confusing for people because we thought you'd get, for example, a grant of $1 million and then the indirect cost would come out of that. But now it actually is more clear because the indirect costs are in addition to your grant application. So that actually makes more sense. And also that the indirect cost money could go into anything that the university happens to choose.
Deems necessary, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I, as an investigator, for example, I play no role in that where that money goes. Absolutely none whatsoever. The only funds that I can play a role in are the ones that go in the direct costs. That's the one that is for me as an investigator to complete and fulfill the proposal that I submitted that was approved.
Mm-hmm. Also, you discussed earlier that when you're actually carrying out your investigation, is that sometimes you have to utilize some of the university services, and you actually have to pay for those services as well out of your grant.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely. For example, it's very common that I've always used animal facilities. So, for example, animals are crucial in medical research because we do a lot of tests in animals, from vaccine development to drug development to assessing toxicity and whatnot. So we use animals, and many universities have an animal facility that may have anything from small mammals such as mice, rats, rabbits. Then they go into larger animals. They can have pigs, horses, cows. It just depends on the nature of the work. And they also may have core facilities that do, for example, they have a core sequencing facility. A lot of people now talk about, sequencing. Especially in our community, the issue of sequencing to the tumor a messenger RNA or do the exome or so on and so forth. So it most often, or no, I shouldn't say most often, but often, the university or the research facility will have a core that can do that, but there will be a fee to do so. And if you're right that you want to, I need to sequence, you do a whole genome sequence of this particular organism or this, whatever, you write it down and you put the cost that is going to be incurred by your research in the direct costs. So you can pay for that. It could be, and it can go on, it'd be a microscopic or microscopy facility, and you typically pay a fee. The fee, for example, for an investigator that belongs to the university might be lower than someone coming from the outside of that particular university. But generally speaking, we still pay for that service.
So basically, any facility at the university, unless it's actually included as in kind, you have to pay for it, if it's
Correct.
scanning or whatever.
Right. There are situations. I've been in situations in which I didn't have to pay. And I'm not going to name what the university was, but they had a core facility for imaging, for microscopy, and we do very important work with microscopy. Some of these microscopes, for example, the confocal microscope, which is a very sophisticated piece of equipment, that can cost $250,000, $300,000. So for one investigator to buy one and seldom use that, it doesn't justify. So the university will have that and make it available to the investigators that will use, and then we don't pay for it because they receive their grant to establish that facility. And you're often going to see grant going to a cancer center, to a core center or something. So that money goes to a core to establish that core, to make it available to the investigator. And just depending on the arrangement that they have, they may charge or not charge the user of that facility. Again, varies between universities, varies between different cores, and so on and so forth.
So do the universities in the US rely on indirect funding as their main source of income as opposed to government funding for those universities?
Right. So this is a critical question. We have in the United States, obviously, state universities. We have private universities. We even have federal universities. And in fact, I've worked in all three levels. I worked in a private university, I worked at a state university, and I worked for a federal university. Many years ago, and perhaps a decade ago or 15 years ago, there was discussion begun across many state universities, which received a significant portion of their funding from their local state budget, that the state would no longer be providing that particular budget, and it would phase out providing money to the state universities. So it became clear that these state universities would, over time, become more dependent or solely dependent on grant funding, grant money coming in via the mechanisms of indirect costs to maintain the functionality of that university. Again, from building maintenance to new buildings, to new facilities, to hiring individuals, to paying salaries, and so on and so forth. So they became very dependent on that. And that allowed for the growth, a sustained growth of these universities across the U.S.
Okay.
And if you have a cut, clearly that puts that entire vision or entire approach in jeopardy. So, if you have a cut that goes from, for example, 60% that they've had in the last however many years, and their adjustments are made maybe every couple of years, every year, depending on how the contract is run. They may have increments of 2% a year, 3% a year, obviously to cover for inflation and so forth. But if you think of a university that charges 60% IDC or indirect costs, and now has the potential of that IDC being dropped, by 75%, going from 60 to 15%, that can have a huge impact down the road.
So what is the current impact on this through National Institute of Health?
So we know now that the administration has decided to cut these IDCs, right? So we have different universities charging different rates. Again, they have a series of explanations depending on where they're located. If they're located, in a very, very expensive area, so their cost is higher than the universities located elsewhere. Sometimes you can see that. Sometimes you don't necessarily see that difference very directly. But this is one of the explanations that they use. Now, if you cut that 60% to 15%, and that's what NIH has now stipulated, and we're pending a judicial decision. In fact, because the 22 states within the U.S. have challenged that in court, and the federal judge has decided to set a hearing for that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the hearing set for February 21st, so this coming week, to decide potentially what's going to happen moving forward. So we don't know yet if the cut's going to be implemented, if it's going to be maintained. But if it does happen, then we can see that, there's a potential for a huge impact in many universities without a significant endowment. There are some private universities with a massive endowment running in the billions of dollars, 20, 30, 40 billions of dollars. So they can have much longer survival. State universities, for the most part, don't have that amount of money. They're running, very close to their limit. And if there is a drop in their funding, they may have an issue in terms of maintaining their current level of employment, future employment, and expansion of campus or facilities and improvement of facilities and so forth. So there is that possibility.
It sounds like a huge shakeup within the university system.
It's a massive shakeup. If they now keep in mind also the following. This is NIH. Different institutions may have, for example, the federal government, which, for example, has NIH, CDC, or DOD. These are agencies that fund research, and they all follow this agreement because it's across the federal government. So if money is coming from the federal government, the agreement was set in such a manner that the IDC will then follow whatever IDC is. But investigators often don't only depend on federal money. They will go after foundations, private money, Gates Foundation and other types of foundation to fund their research. We all heard that. Those institutions don't need to follow that arrangement. They have their own set of arrangements, and they may not pay anything in terms of indirect costs, or they may pay a percentage, 10, 12, 15%. They may even pay 50%. They may even, want to follow the federal government. It's their choice. But some of the large foundations that I know of, they either have no IDC or they have a 15% of IDC.
So it's big changes happening.
Correct.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the legal action progresses over time, because I presume law works very slowly, and we'll see how the impact of the 15% reduction in indirect costs is going to work within the community.
And regardless of where you stand in terms of, do you agree with the cut or are you completely against the cut? As an investigator who was funded by that, and you need to know, for example, if I have we as investigators in our labs, we don't have a single project running at a time. We typically have multiple projects running at a time, and we can submit proposals for each of those projects, and we can have a line of research with the individuals that will do research A, and we ask for X amount of money. We can do potentially a separate pool of individuals. Sometimes we have a couple of individuals that may, fluctuate between one research and another, one plan research and another. But this is all in black and white. In terms of there can be no overlap. There can be, the time is well delineated and so on and so forth. This amount of money goes for here, that amount of money goes for there. But think of the scenario in which I may have three federal grants coming into my lab for 3 independent research lines, right? Each of those will have 60% of IDC. So now, if I have a 500,000, then I have a second 500,000. If I have another 200,000, so I have 1.2 million. That adds up in terms of IDC that is going to the administration, to the university administration. again, is this something that can be, and how do you justify that? You know, should we have across the board 60%? Probably not. Should we have across the board 15%? Probably not. But I think we should have a across the board limit. This is my view. This is my personal view. May have a across the board limit, and then look at case by case to see what justifies additional requests for indirect funds. I think that makes more sense. That makes our money as a taxpayer better, have, not only accounted for what it's being used for. And as I said before, as the PI of a particular project, even though the university is stepping 60% on that money that I'm asking, I have no say whatsoever on where the money goes. And only once in my line of research, only once, as far as employment that I've had, that the money went to the university. A small fraction of the money came back to my department, and a small fraction of that then came back to me. That was the only one that I heard of, and I'm not going to name what the university was. But most, as far as I know, most cases, we don't know what the money is spent on. If whether the federal government is coming down and checking out, with the university, where's the money coming in? Again, they could come to my lab and I would show where all the money went. Certainly the university would do the same thing, but I as an investigator, never had a say on it.
Okay. So just a quick talk about here in Australia. We've recently got a $20 million pledge from our government through Mark Butler, the Health Minister, and $14 million of that is to establish a national child brain cancer clinical trial consortium. $6 million is for early stage clinical research to increase understanding of childhood brain cancer and develop new treatments. But the breakdown costs we've actually got is a bit more direct. The University of Newcastle, where Professor Matt Dunn is actually working, he's also a DIPG parent and he works on DIPG lines. He's got allocated $2 million used on cutting edge technologies, including artificial intelligence to improve outcomes for children with diffuse midline gliomas, which is DMG and DIPG. Similarly, we've got Monash University have got $2 million to develop therapies targeting specific genetic mutations in high-grade gliomas, including DIPG, and also Western Australia has got another $1.1 million to develop safer and more effective treatments. Matt Dunn's group has been given information into using cutting-edge technologies, including spatial genomics and blood cell profiling with data analysis and machine learning for artificial intelligence. So here in Australia, our universities are actually funded by government, federal and state. I'm not sure about the indirect costs, but I presume they're built in there somewhere. But here we actually specify where the funding actually goes to and how much we're actually going to the researchers as such. So yeah, and we were talking a little bit earlier about what your thoughts are on this funding for DIPG.
Right. And before we go, I'd like to indicate if anyone is curious about research funding, particularly from NIH, and I think NIH perhaps links with other federal funding. You can search for what is referred to as NIH Reporter, REPORTER, and that will bring you to a page within NIH. It's a search tool that you can type whatever you're looking for. You can type the type of disease you want to investigate. You can, if you know the name of an investigator, you can type it in, and that will then list the grants, active grants, and sometimes past grants, history of grants that an individual has received for a particular project and how much, And if you go in and you click, and again, that how much will include both direct and indirect. And then you have to be savvy to click for each of those programs to determine how much went for direct and how much went for indirect. And that is all public information, so anyone can find that out. And as far as in doing that exercise for NIH and doing for DIPG, for example, you're going to come across two institutes, NCI, National Cancer Institute, and the National Institutes of Neurological Diseases and Stroke, NINDS. And if you search for the DIPG, you're going to come across a number of projects that have been funded for the DIPG in the two institutes. But you have to go and then in each individual funded project to identify how much money has gone to the DIPG if you're queuing specifically the DIPG. And what you find is that NCI has, for direct costs, about $8.1 million for the DIPG. And you're going to come across, money going for research or for cancer centers. Obviously, the DIPG is plugged into that cancer center, but because it's going to the cancer center, it's hard to determine how much of that actually goes to a DIPG-based research. So you can't tell them. Only when you have, the DIPG define in the title or define in the abstract or define somewhere in the application, that is what I separated. So 8.1 million coming from NCI, and I think if I'm not mistaken, 5.2 million coming from NINDS. And you can find, and if you go to the different web pages of different institutes, you can identify how much money each institute receives and how much money they dedicate to research. And you can do a little math, you can calculate back and forth, that you come across some of the percentages that I have posted on our page previously. And you can do this, for any cancer, any disease, any investigator, any institution. You can go and search for how much money they're getting. What are the current projects? And those will involve anything from basic research to very large funded centers to clinical trials. Everything's going to be listed there.
Lovely. Okay. Well, it's been really good talking to you today, Marcelo, and our current chats about DIPG. If anyone would like to leave a comment, that would be wonderful, and also ask us questions so that we can actually do further short videos in the future of things that interest you in the world of DIPG. So thank you again today, Marcelo.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here. See you soon. So look forward to see you again soon.
Yeah, you too. Take care.